Hello and welcome to the Lens at 177. Today joining me as guest is the Executive Director of the Fiji Council of Social Services, Vani Catanasiga. Vani, welcome to the program today. Let's start off. As you know, this program is related to the upcoming general election, and poverty is one of those issues that will matter for the voters. Let's start off by you defining why does poverty matter during a Fiji general election?
Well, I think poverty should be, if not the most important thing, it should be one of the most critical issues that people should be looking out for when they are considering the perhaps the manifestos that are being put forward by the different political parties. I think poverty is really about when you're talking about poverty during national elections, it's really about the kinds of governance that an aspiring political party that's aspiring for leadership should be placing at the center of their perhaps campaigns. It really is about, when you think about development is about ensuring that citizens live a life of dignity. But when poverty is there, dignity really is, there is no, perhaps there is, it's being affected by people's ability to live life with dignity because they have no income or less income. They don't have access to education. So poverty rightfully should be at the center of discussions around elections and who they should elect. It kind of is a contest of ideas about how we eradicate poverty. It's about understanding the context that we live in. So for me, that is one of the most important issues for FCOSS, and we're looking at how political parties are proposing ideas and programs through their manifestos for how that work will be done in the next 4 years.
It's okay to put words into a manifesto that we will do this, we will do that.
Yes.
But when it comes to deliver, are you happy with how the poorest of poor in the country have been helped in the past maybe 15 to 20 years?
Well, I'll be honest, we have had some challenges. We've talked to government about the need to urgently overhaul the social welfare system, for example, and this was a good time to really critique that. Was when COVID happened. We could see so many people being left behind, people who were vulnerable. There were perhaps cohorts that we were looking specifically at, like the elderly and single, headed households who were not being looked after and were falling right through those safety nets. And to us, when we were able to engage with government in the various cluster systems, in the policy platforms, the one thing we did say is that it is now apparent that this system is no longer working. It is in a dire need for an overhaul, and I'm hearing that there is some effort to do that, but it's not fast enough. We really should have done that 5 years ago.
I know you, your staff are on the ground all the time. Just take us through what one family may go through if they don't have a meal for the day and they are poor, they cannot afford. How do they feel and how do they make the 24 hours that is ahead of them?
Well, there are many stories that we're recalling from the surveys that we've conducted. We've encountered communities or families in communities that have been affected by disasters and have not fully recovered. These are disasters that have occurred over the last 2-3 years. There was a family that we surveyed in Tailevu, and we had worked with our members from the Nosori Dikos to survey. We had rolled out a livelihood survey. And our volunteers, having been out for 3 days, when they came back that day, they were affected. They were very emotional by what they had seen. And one of the stories that came out of that is there was a family that was living in a tent that was around mid-2020, and when the enumerators came into contact with them, they were given cups of water and a plate of biscuit. So when they were going through their questions, one of the young women that was conducting the survey said, So what do you have to eat? And they said, the biscuit we've just served you was the last food we had. And that really, so the volunteers that were there said, we can't eat this now. We can't take from them what they already have. So that's one in Lami, where there was two sisters looking after their uncle who was disabled. When they wake up in the morning, they have to go to the foreshore and the river to look for fish or to look for food that would feed them for the day. And they'd spend half a day out there trying to look for food. We were lucky that we were able to tell the story to a group of businessmen that then came out to help them. But those are the stories that we encounter. Those are just the tips of the iceberg for us, I guess. And there's many other stories like that in other areas, Mba, in the north, in the Eastern Division.
Why do you think politicians who are aspiring to lead the country now should know of stories like this?
I think it shows that they understand the everyday situation of normal citizens, or ordinary citizens, and even those who get left behind. There's so many of them that often we used to say in the past, they live on the periphery of society. Now they no longer live on the periphery of society. Some of the communities that I've just talked about live 10 minutes away from Nosori. Some live 5 minutes away from Suva. They are no longer at the periphery. They are right here in our midst. So that shows, I guess that's an indicator of where we are as a community.
What do you think the poor look out for when a candidate, provisional candidate or candidate of any party walks into their area? What do you think these poor citizens of the country look out for? What answers are they looking out for from that person in front of them?
Well, first they look at your track record as a political, leader, or as an aspiring political leader. They look at whether you've been to their communities. They look at whether you have had an experience working with other communities, if you haven't been to their communities, if you've dealt with, if you've done voluntary community work, if you've tried to help in the past. That matters to them, because immediately there is that sense of trust. And I think it's important that we are able to connect with where they are. Sometimes we bring ideas that sometimes they find hard to understand, to connect to. So it's important to connect to people where they are, rather than asking them to step up to where you are as an aspiring political leader.
Currently, the poverty rate is around 24% based on the 2019-2020 household and income expenditure survey.
Right.
The SDG, I think, a Sustainable Development Goal 2013
yes.
requires that country halve its poverty rate. Where is Fiji headed? Where are we going?
I don't think it's possible. When FCOSS talks about poverty, it looks at it from two components: access and agency. Access to social services, access to information, access in its fullest sense. And agency in the sense that, we create an enabling space for all citizens to act independently for their own resilience. And we've measured the work that stakeholders for development government has done in this, in these areas of work. So when we think about access and agency as FCOSS and the surveys that we've conducted about 8 so far, and they've ranged from livelihood surveys to WASH surveys. We will not be able to do that. We will not be able to have poverty, the poverty rate by that date. If we don't work on access and agency, if we don't work to avail access across different areas, different communities, different population cohorts, for the young, for the older citizens, for those who live in formal and informal communities. When we look at it, are we creating an enabling space so that they can work independently to work for their resilience? We're not there. there yet. And our surveys have shown that until we create that enabling space where, you know, citizens can access information on services, where they can be served well. You know, if you think about it at the local level, a single mother looking to establish a business, how hard it is for her to get a license. You know, she has to go to various places. So no, we don't think as FCOSS that that's possible.
Thank you very much, Vani. We will see you on the other side of the short break.
We were around when the deed was first signed. We were around when the first car engine roared. We were around when the very first was crowned. Through devastations, jubilant celebrations, and the milestones. We will continue to be around to bring you all the stories first.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to the discussion, and Vani Catanasiga of FCOSS is with us. Vani, before the break, you had mentioned that we will not be able to meet the SDG 2013 goal of halving poverty in all dimensions in the country. Who do you blame for that? Is the government to be blamed? Are the NGOs to be blamed?
I'd say usually when you look at a work that requires a multi-stakeholder approach, you look at leadership, you look at technical expertise and the technical oversight that's supposed to be provided for such a work, because some work requires that sort of, I guess, you know, expertise. When we look at poverty and its multidimensional components, you need to consider that it needs to be coordinated from a central focal point, and that sort of agency needs to understand the various aspects that's required, the kind of effort that needs to be put in, where it should come from. So I'd say it usually comes from good leadership. If it works, it's good leadership. If it doesn't, it's not good leadership. So I'd say that, you know, we'd have to look at the work of Ministry of Social Welfare. Is there enough political will to overhaul a system that hasn't worked? That's one question. The other question is, are stakeholders working to support a national effort? Why are they not supporting a national effort? Is there enough clarity? Is there enough coordination being conducted? And then we look at also the important role of donors and development stakeholders that are often external to Fiji. Sometimes we have to ensure that they understand the context within which we operate. It's very contextual, some of what we encounter with poverty. And when donors don't understand that, they bring ideas from other places that are external here but will not work. And so I think when you ask a question around who is to be blamed, I think you look at leadership, you look at systems that are supposed to be in place to coordinate that sort of a multi-stakeholder partnership. You also look at geopolitics too at some point, and what agendas donors have. Because if we have a good system in place, they will come in and fit into that national system. If we don't, they can, you know, pretty well do whatever they'd like.
There's a big debate on data on ethnicity for helping the poor. How big is a problem if you don't have data on ethnicity to assist those who need assistance?
I think it's a big problem. When you think about communities and how you roll out programs to really mitigate and eradicate, if you like, you have to think about where communities are and how they behave. What are the cultures? Because that influences what they eat, what they do in their spare time for extracurricular, how they, in terms of income as well. It's pretty important for NGOs like ours. We look at a targeted approach. We look at vulnerability index, and it has cultural aspects that we need to consider. For example, if you want to go and run a training for income generating projects in Itoke community, you will be careful not to run anything at around 6 or 7 o'clock. Why? 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. Why? Because that's when they have devotion. Some communities you go to, they have organized community work. If you're organizing a, like a workshop that looks at providing skills training, you have to make sure that you don't come to an empty hall. Why? Because all of the youths have gone for Solsolewaki. Those are the kinds of things. It's very common sense to some of us, but it may not be for some who may not know what's happening on the ground.
Do you have any latest data on ethnic breakdown of who's poor in the Fijian community, who's poor in the Indian community? Or have you relied heavily on the last data we had that was given in the household income expenditure report that removed ethnicity-based data?
We do. We have ethnic data, and it pretty much reflects what was in the highest. Is it highest? That has come out of our, if I recall correctly, that was our WASH survey that had data of, had that implications as well, and we had released this, shared this with our partners, UNICEF, Ministry of Health. So it reflects it reflects what Hayes had indicated, that it's okay. Populations may be faring far worse than others.
Okay, that brings me to the next question: COVID-19 and poverty. How much did the COVID-19 push people into poverty, and are these people outside of the poverty area now, or do they remain in that poverty grab?
I think recovery is slow from the pandemic. What the pandemic did was reverse, I understand at the global level, reverse 10 years of poverty eradication work. And at the local levels, what we saw as well and what we continue to see is issues around access still being affected, access to information. So while in some communities have demonstrated amazing capacities for resilience, what we continue to see is things that could have so aspects like access to information for support services. If that was improved, we would have seen much higher rates of recovery in communities. So no, I think that the recovery at community level is still slow. We need to work better together as stakeholders to make sure that they continue to be provided that support during these critical times. Yeah?
So as a stakeholder, as an NGO, what specifically do you need from our government to allow you to do more work on the ground to help government reduce the poverty rate?
Well, we've when we initially looked at where we could be best useful, we looked at the subnational level, and we saw that there was a lot of goodwill from civil servants that work at that level, who understand and who work closer to communities. There was a lot of goodwill there for NGO participation, for community participation. So that work continues. And I think that there should be more improvements. I think that a lot more support should be given to subnational, government offices to do their work effectively. So some of them don't have the resources to be able to move from one area to another. They work with very little resources, but they do great work, and they already understand the importance of working collaboratively. Yeah? At the national level, there are some thematic areas where we've made some progress, but others that are still yet to, we're yet to see some traction in those areas. The national level may require some of that, but at the subnational level, our colleagues who are working at the subnational level may require support, cars, vehicles, other resources, laptops, even just to remain in contact with people. Capacity building is a big component as well. I think one of the things we've discovered as an NGO is that we've forgotten the art of talking to each other. Because some things can be resolved very easily just by talking, dialoguing. But we've all forgotten how to dialogue as a society, and I think there is room there for improvement.
Vani, thank you very much. We'll join Vani in a while after this short break.
We were around when the deed was first signed. We were around when the first car engine roared. We were around when the very first was crowned. Through devastations, jubilant celebrations, and the milestones. We will continue to be around to bring you all the stories first.
Thank you very much, and we are talking with Vani Catanasiga, Executive Director of FCOSS. Vani, before the break you spoke about how government can support an NGO like yours. Let me ask you, if a new government or the next government coming into power in 4 weeks' time, if you were asked to give a amount which they can give you in terms of finances, what would be that amount be that you need?
Well, usually NGOs like ours, we're a local NGO. We're a membership-based organization. We've been here since 1965. And much of the issues that we face are just like any other NGOs. But one of the key things that we require is core funding. And core funding for us is around 300K a year. That allows us to operate and support our members, to step in during disasters. We do that, a lot of the work that we do around disasters is, spearheaded by our members. They are community volunteers that work with commissioners and the provincial administrators. So yeah, 300K for us is a sort of a core funding ceiling, annually at least.
Okay. And how long have you been asking for funding like this from the government in power?
We haven't.
You haven't?
We haven't. We deliberately did not ask for money.
And there's a reason for that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we can maintain our independence. We work very closely with government, particularly during times of disaster, because we are on the Disaster Council, and we find that when we do that work, that a lot of our own sector perceive us negatively because we are working with government. But disaster is when the nation should, come together as one, and we often try to support communities who have been affected. And so we, since 2006, have not received funding from government. And there have been suggestions from our members to do that, but we have tried as much as possible to raise funds elsewhere. We will work with government. We also need to ensure we maintain our independence.
Okay, the 2019-2020 Household and Income Expenditure Report clearly states that the poorest of poor in Fiji are from the rural area. The reasons are there, but from your side, from your assessment, why are the rural in Fiji poorest?
When we think about the surveys that we've rolled out, much of it has to do with access to basic infrastructure, water, sanitation, access to information. Oftentimes we find that governments announced all these initiatives, you can apply for this and that, but our rural community, and we've got our district councils of social services in a lot of these areas, they won't know about it until we've sent it out through our own communication networks. We've got chats with our DCOSS in the northern, in the eastern division, and sometimes they don't know about it until we send it through that, and then they say, how do we apply? By then it's almost to the deadline. So for me, it's really understanding that one of the most basic requirements to get people out of poverty is access to information. And not many of our rural communities have that ability to access information. We have it at our fingertips through social media, but some of them don't have, they can't even connect online. So we try and find other means to send them that information. So for me, it's really just access, one, to information, access to infrastructure, access to education, social services, and all of that. So I think if we improve that, then we will see change in the rates of poverty in the rural areas.
Okay. Does Fiji need a Ministry of Poverty on its own?
There is a poverty monitoring unit, and
what about a ministry of its own, just to tackle all these issues that we have talked about today?
Well, for us, it's also in understanding that the work has been done in a siloed approach, that we've just been doing our different works on poverty but not connecting to each other. So perhaps the needed value add is the coordination of this. And we were talking about multidimensional poverty, and understanding that different stakeholders are working on the different dimensions of poverty, but they're not talking to each other. And so for me, if that Ministry of Poverty Eradication does coordination and links all of that work together, great, then that's what but I think it still can be done by the ministry that exists, and that's why I'm suggesting that there be an overhaul of the welfare system in Fiji.
Your assessment on the performance of the Poverty Eradication Unit, how are they doing?
I don't know what they're doing. I think, that's a sign. I work for the Fiji Council of Social Services. I've been, FCOSS has been around even before independence. We helped to formulate some of the policies that are currently in place. But I don't know anything about the poverty monitoring unit, so that's a sign of things.
The government is giving out monthly social welfare payments for those who are not able to find work or who are physically unable to work, for single mothers and elderly. Do you think these payments are helping in reducing poverty?
I have been in forums where they've shared that that is helpful, but it's not enough. And really, that's a dilemma that we often grapple with in this area of work, is how much do we give to help support? For me, personally, and of course, I guess in that sense that we'd like to see people be, given that concerted support to get them from here, from poverty, out of poverty, and we don't yet see that. And I think that we need to rethink how we are providing this support, particularly for people who live with disabilities, because the barriers that they face, when we talk about physical access, even in public spaces in Fiji, it's not even at the 50% level. If we've already provided that, then I would say perhaps it's working, but at this point I don't think so.
What are some of the disadvantages that you or your members have seen in regards to the social welfare payments?
When you think about people living with disabilities, some of them can't go and access this themselves. They can't go to the shops themselves to buy. They rely very much on their carers to use that. And we've encountered cases where the beneficiaries are immobile. and we wonder where the payments have been used, because we don't see it in the, when you look at the conditions in which a person living with disability is in, you can draw a few conclusions. So that sort of monitoring needs to be better. Perhaps we need to think about providing support for carers as well.
Vani, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Before going, just maybe finally, if you were a voter, what's your message to your fellow Fijians in terms of electing the new candidates for Parliament? What should you look out for?
Well, I'd say we have experienced the type of leadership. We've looked at the services that they've provided. We're in a good position to judge what we have gotten and what we might need more of. And when we think about access, think about your access, whether you have access to information, whether you have access to the services you need, quality education, whether your children have that ability. Think about your ability to act independently. Are you right now in a position to act independently for your own resilience? I think those are important factors for us as voters for this year. And I'd like to wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Vani. On that note, we end this program here. I was talking to Vani Catanasiga, the Executive Director of Fiji Council of Social Services. Join me again soon.